They blamed the Inuit widow for the blizzards, until a silent shaman spoke her true name. Aningak stepped from her igloo into the swirling whiteness, her sealskin boots sinking softly into drifts that rose above her knees. Each breath felt like shards of ice slicing through her lungs. Night had fallen hours ago, but the storm raged on, a furious choir of wind and snow. Lanterns in distant igloos flickered like timid stars, yet none pierced the tempest's veil. Rumors rode the gusts, that Aningak had called this blizzard, that her sorrow bound the winds to her will. She fixed her gaze on the frozen lagoon, where the only hope of water lay, concealed beneath a thick crust of ice. Heart pounding, she lashed her sled's ropes and set out across the yard, each step a labor against nature's fury. Village elders whispered behind closed doors, "She brings ruin. Her tears freeze the sea. We must drive her away." Children, their voices muffled by furs, mimicked the howl of the wind and pointed at her back. Reaching the lagoon, Aningak crouched beside a jagged hole. Frost-bitten bones of forgotten travelers crunched beneath her gloves. She steadied her trembling hands and lowered the bucket, its iron edges scraping against the ice with a hollow clang. The wind howled in response, as though mocking her meager offering. Then, in a sudden lull, she felt the world hush. The storm's anger paused. She drew the laden bucket from the depths, water sloshing like captured truth within. A triumphant warmth crept through her, dispelling the chill that clung to her bones. As she turned to return, a fierce gust struck, nearly tearing the pail from her grasp. Snow swirled into ghostly shapes at the edge of her vision. With quiet defiance, she pressed her lips to the bucket's rim and whispered, "I am not your storm, I am its heart." Within the village's labyrinth of snow-domed igloos, rumors circulated faster than sled dogs chasing the horizon. Families huddled by dim oil lamps, their breath fogging the small windows as they watched Aningak's solitary figure battle the storm outside. Inside, voices rose like a gathering tide. "She calls the wind," hissed one elder. "Her tears freeze our hope," whispered another. Mothers clutched children close, pressing soft fur-lined robes to stifle cries when the gale rattled igloo walls. Aningak moved through narrow tunnels of packed snow, hauling bundles of driftwood and fragments of seal's bones, each piece a humble offering to appease the gale. Her gloves, stiff as boards, pressed against her sides to keep her balance as the wind snaked around corners. Above each doorway, villagers hung carved bone talismans shaped like curled claws, tokens meant to repel her cursed presence. Their jagged shadows danced in the lantern glow. Her closest friend, Naja, emerged from a low archway, eyes bright with unshed tears. "They say the storm grows stronger because of you," she murmured, voice trembling like a candle flame in the wind. A pang of sorrow struck Aningak's heart. "I only seek water for my dogs and firewood for my hearth," she replied, voice soft but steady. "My grief does not bind the wind." Naja looked away, gloved hands twisting the edge of her parka. "But the wind listens, and it answers with fury," she said. Aningak closed her eyes against the sting of shame and determination coiling in her chest. "Then let us teach it mercy," she vowed. With that, she continued her silent pilgrimage through the igloos, each step echoing in frost-cracked corridors, a testament to her resolve and the fragile hope that understanding might calm even the fiercest storm. Before dawn's pale light, Aningak hauled her umiak to the water's edge, its worn wood creaking under a burden heavier than any she had borne before. The wind, freshly emboldened by the first light of morning, clawed at her sealskin hood and rattled the oar in her grip. She glanced back at her home, igloos buried beneath drifts as tall as warriors, and then faced the grey expanse of the sea, where frothy waves churned like restless spirits. Each paddle stroke was a battle, each breath an intrusion of ice and salt. She aimed for a sheltered cove, where tide-carved pools held strands of kelp and clusters of conch shells, life-affirming treasures she would weave into charms and use to feed her sled dogs. The umiak rose and fell with angry waves, and sea spray crystallized on her eyelashes, turning each blink into a trial. Reaching the cove, she thrust a gloved hand into the frigid water and gathered thick green kelp, its slimy tendrils entwined around smooth shells. The chill shot up her arm, but she did not relent. She dove beneath an overhang of ice to retrieve shells that rolled beneath fractured rocks, emerging gasping as if reborn. Baskets filled, she paused to catch her breath, chest heaving like a wounded bird. A sudden hush fell over the sound of waves, a silence so profound she almost thought she imagined it. Then, on a rocky bluff overhead, she spotted him, Karlik, the silent shaman, draped in thick fur and clutching his drum. His presence felt like gravity itself, pulling her gaze. For a heartbeat, wind and waves stilled, as though the world awaited their next move. Aningak's heart thundered. She straightened, hands clutching sea spoils close to her chest. The wind, she realized, was no mere tempest, but a living entity, listening and waiting. With newfound determination, she lifted her chin and spoke into the gathering dusk. "I gather life, not ruin." Legends whispered through Arctic valleys about Karlik, the Angakuk who heard the rhythms of ice and bone. Some said he tamed wild bears, others swore he could still avalanches with a chant. Yet none had heard his voice. He spoke only through gestures and ancient instruments. That afternoon, as Aningak returned from the sea, she found him waiting by the entrance to her igloo. He crouched beside a small fire she had lit, its glow fragile against the relentless wind. His eyes, dark and fathomless, met hers. Without hesitation, he set a carved bone flute on the snow between them. The runes etched into its surface pulsed faintly, as if alive. Aningak knelt, heart thundering, and reached for the flute. Fingers trembling, she traced the arcane symbols. In his stance lay no threat, only an invitation. Smoke from her fire curled around his feet, then drifted skyward, carrying with it the scent of spruce and earth. Around them, villagers paused their tasks, drawn by the silent exchange. He produced a drum made from caribou hide, striking it once. The sound rattled the air, weaving through the howling wind. Each beat resonated in Aningak's chest, unearthing a memory of her husband's laughter and the promise they shared beneath calmer skies. As the drumbeat faded, Karlik rose and stepped back into a swirl of snow, leaving Aningak clutching the flute. Though he said no word, she felt his message clear. Listen, learn, and discover her place within the wind's song. Night's veil had slipped away, only to reveal a sky ablaze with ribbons of emerald and violet. Aningak followed Karlik across windswept tundra toward a steaming fissure, where geothermal warmth bled through ice. The air tasted of sulfur and promise. There, beneath dancing lights, they knelt on frosted ground. Karlik produced clay gray as storm clouds, molding it with practiced grace into a talisman shaped like a curled bear claw. Aningak mirrored his movements, pressing her own clay into the imprint of her palm. The crusted frost beneath them cracked softly as they worked. He struck his drum twice, a deep cadence that pulsed through the earth. Snowflakes slowed their descent, twisting in deliberate spirals beneath the aurora's glow. Then Karlik drew symbols in the snow, spirals for breath, concentric circles for cycles, intertwining lines for paths unseen. Each glyph pulsed with ancient light. Aningak traced the symbols with cold fingers, heart pounding. The lights above responded, flaring brighter with each touch. Steam curled around them, mingling with her breath as if the world exhaled in relief. He placed the completed talisman in her palm, solid, warm, humming with life. As she stood, the aurora arced overhead like a celestial bridge. In that moment, Aningak felt a fierce kinship with the storm. Not an enemy, but a companion bound by grief and resilience. By midday, the elders convened in the great snow hollow, an icy cathedral carved by ancient glaciers. Icicles hung like crystalline chandeliers from the curved ceiling, catching shards of light that danced across the frozen floor. The storm's fury was muffled here, but tension crackled under every breath. Elder Anianik rose, his voice wavering like a wind chime in a gale. "Aningak's sorrow has unleashed the storm. We cannot endure another night of its wrath." He slammed a gnarled staff upon the ice, echoing through the chamber. Across from him, Elder Sivakik leaned forward, robes brushing the floor. "Our pacts with the spirits speak of suffering birthing guardians. We must hear the Angakuk's wisdom before casting her away." The council fell silent as Karlik entered, drums slung over his shoulder, and a carved scroll of caribou hide in hand. Without a word, he laid the scroll on a block of ice at the council's center. Sivukik unrolled it carefully, tracing runes painted in faded ochre. His rumbling voice read aloud, "From grief shall rise one woven of wind and water, whose name shall bind storm to sanctuary. She carries the breath of ancestors in her spirit." Gasps rippled. Aniarnik's brow furrowed in confusion, while younger elders exchanged uncertain glances. Outside, the wind paused, sending a solitary flake drifting through an opening above. Kalik tapped his drum once. A soft thrum resonated underfoot, reminding them of Earth's heartbeat. Sevukik closed the scroll and turned to the assembly. "We have heard the prophecy," he declared. "If the storm is to be our protector, we must embrace her true role." The council murmured, torn between fear and awe. Aningak stood at the chamber's entrance, clutching her talisman, heat from her spirit radiating warmth even in the frozen air. She raised her head, silent, yet resolute. In that moment, the elders recognized not a curse, but a bridge between their world and the whispering winds. Afternoon light vanished as the storm reached its zenith. Snow whipped in horizontal sheets, erasing landmarks and swallowing sound. The village trembled beneath a white curtain that moved with relentless force. Dogs in their kennels howled, shackled by fear. Fishermen huddled behind igloo walls, peering through narrow slits as the gale tested the fragile barriers of ice and bone. Aningak stood grounded at the village's core, talisman clutched in her frost-numbed fingers. She raised it aloft, daring the storm to heed her truth. Behind her, villagers formed a tense circle, their faces illuminated by the occasional flash of lightning beyond the walls. They clutched bone amulets and bark charms, knuckles white as they debated her fate. "Drive her out!" some shouted, voices carried off by the wind. "She beckons our doom." Others hesitated, remembering Kalik's prophecy. Fear warred with hope in their hearts. With teeth chattering, Aningak shouted into the gale, "I did not command this storm." Her voice cracked, a fragile defiance seeking purchase in the roaring chaos. For a heartbeat, the winds paused as if caught off guard. Then, from the swirling white, a figure emerged. Kalik, flute pressed to his lips. He played a single, haunting note, low and resonant, like ancient bones singing. The sound carved a path through the blizzard's roar. Snowflakes faltered mid-air, drifting downward in slow, gentle spirals. Silence, profound and holy, settled over the village. Aningak lowered the talisman and exhaled, the storm's weight lifting from her soul. In that sacred hush, the villagers glimpsed her true heart. Not a harbinger of destruction, but a keeper of balance. In the wake of silence, the world seemed to hold its breath. Snow hung motionless in mid-air, each flake a suspended moment of awe. Aningak stood firm as Kalik approached, bone knife in hand, his every movement deliberate and calm. He knelt and traced glowing runes around her in the packed snow, symbols pulsing with ancient power. Circle of protection, lines of truth, spirals of renewal. Then, in a voice both strange and familiar, he spoke, "Kaluk, she who listens to the wind." The syllables echoed like distant thunder, resonating through the frozen air. As her true name passed his lips, the runes flared with brilliance, the snow at their centers melting into delicate patterns of ice. A warmth filled Aningak's chest, a radiance that chased away the heaviness of grief. Her heart beat in harmony with the wind's soft exhalations. She felt the spirits of ancestors, blending their breath with her own, affirming her place between earth and sky. The villagers watched, wide-eyed, breath visible in puffs of wonder. Where they once saw a cursed widow, they now beheld a guardian whose sorrow had become a bridge. Children reached out, hoping to touch the shifting lights that danced at her fingertips. Water trickled from the thawing snow symbols, seeping into the ground as a testament to rebirth. In that sacred moment, the story of Aningak ended, and Kaluk's journey began. Morning dawned with a sky the color of pale jade, as if the world itself had been renewed. Kaluk, Aningak reborn, stood at the village's edge where driftwood and snow met. A gentle breeze twined through the igloos, carrying the promise of calm. Children tumbled outside, faces upturned, catching soft flakes on their tongues and giggling at their cold kisses. Hunters emerged, their breath misting as they bowed to Kaluk in quiet respect, offering skins and carved whistles as tokens of newfound trust. Inside the central courtyard, Elder Aniarnik approached, his eyes moist with remorse. He held a bundle of dried fish wrapped in woven sinew. "My child," he whispered, "accept our apologies and these humble gifts. May they warm you as our regrets freeze." Kaluk accepted, her heart swelling with compassion rather than scorn. She touched his hand in blessing, and he felt a warmth that spread through his bones. Women brought forth woven cloaks and smoked char, pressing them into Kaluk's hands. "You have taught us to listen," they said, voices threaded with gratitude. She nodded, offering quiet smiles and nods, each gesture a bridge to healing. The wind danced around her, stirring the cloaks as if approving their gift. High on a rocky ridge, Kaluk watched from afar, drum at rest. His silhouette carved against the morning sky was a silent salute. Kaluk lifted the bone flute to her lips and played a melody of soft notes, a song of water and wind, sorrow and renewal. The tune drifted across the white plain, weaving into each igloo like a gentle hearth fire. Villagers paused, letting the music wash over them. In that moment, every heart in the village beat with shared purpose, to honor the keeper of their winds, and to remember that even the fiercest storm could give life when heard with empathy. Under the lingering glow of dawn-lit auroras, the village gathered for a feast of roasted seal and simmered fish stew. Smoke curled from ice-cut fire pits, carrying the mingled scents of spruce and cedar into the crisp morning air. Kaluk sat at the head of the table, her talisman resting beside her bowl carved from driftwood. Children wove circles around her, laughing as they tried to mimic the flute tunes she had taught them. Elder Sivukik rose, his robes rustling like distant waves. He raised a carved bone goblet filled with fermented berry juice. "Today," he proclaimed, "we honor not only the storm's terror, but its gift of balance. Kaluk, guardian of wind and spirit, accept our vow, to heed the storm's voice and cherish its lesson." At his words, the crowd cheered, voices lifting in a chorus that rattled the igloo's frames. Kaluk stood and stepped forward, tassels of her hood brushing the snow. She lifted the bone flute in acknowledgement, and with a single breath played a final, gentle melody. The notes drifted upward, blending with the aurora's silent dance. Beyond the village, Kaluk watched from a distant reef, his drum at his side. He nodded once, then vanished into the rising mist. In the hush that followed, Kaluk felt the wind swirl around her in joyous acclaim, carrying seeds of promise for seasons yet to come. And so, under the sky's painted lights, a new cycle began, one born of grief, tempered by understanding, and carried on the wings of patience and hope. In the stillness after the storm, ask yourself, what hidden strengths lie within your own sorrows, waiting to transform fear into hope? If Kaluk's journey moved you, share your thoughts below. What true name might your own heart reveal when you learn to listen to life's fiercest winds? And if you believe in the power of understanding over judgment, subscribe now and join us as we uncover more tales of resilience and renewal.